What's up guys, welcome to Found Flicks. The vastly overlooked and impressive Bates Motel came to a conclusion this week, ending its 5-season run with a particularly emotional and brutal finale. The show constantly exceeded my expectations, and in seasons 4 and 5, the show was consistently tense and exciting. And going into season 5, knowing the end was on the horizon, made everything have a lingering feeling of dread. One thing they did really well in season 5 in particular was twisting our preconceived idea of what will happen. We knew that season 5 would enter the story into psycho territory, and the show was able to pay homage to the original movie and defy our expectations. And it managed to evolve beyond its original concept as a psycho prequel and become something entirely its own. Throughout the season, they defy our expectations by leading us down a path, then twisting it into a new direction. I predicted back in my premiere video that when Caleb was booted from Dylan's, he would head back to Bates Motel and lead to a burying the hatchet between him and Norma, or Norman as Norma. This went down as one would expect, but when it came to killing him, Norman couldn't pull the trigger and tells him to go. Caleb hightails it out, and a daydreaming chick plows into him with the car, and Caleb is killed. So we see some of what we expect, then twisting it, because I definitely didn't see Caleb going out quite like that. But the biggest example was with the Marion Crane storyline. It's a huge divergence from what happened to the character in the movie, which I could see as a controversial choice. But they play with what we expect as soon as Marion shows up, focusing on things like the shower in the motel room. We're like, yeah, that's where she gets killed. And in the recreation of what would be her death scene, Marion gets out of the shower this time, upset about Sam. Even after this, it feels like Marion is on borrowed time and Norman is going to kill her at any moment. But Norman is able to restrain himself and is actually quite nice to her, convincing her to take the money and run. And of course, it's Sam that winds up getting killed by Norman in the shower at Mother's insistence. This is a big twist on the Sam character's fate as well, who is more or less the protagonist and the one to stop Norman in Psycho. But to me, the most fascinating part of the season was the evolving relationship between Norman and Mother, which comes to a head with Sam's murder. At the beginning of the season, Norman is still completely under the spell of his delusions. He truly believes that Norma is still alive and faked her death, and they are still together. And it's in this scene that our first major shift occurs. As Norman is struggling for dominance over the Mother personality, Mother shifts from being his mother into something else. It's here that Mother first refers to Norma as her, and Norman recognizes that Norma isn't actually standing there, but she is a creation of his mind. From this point, their dynamic is more like partners, even though Mother still has her own agenda. And it's after this discussion that Sam is killed, the difference being this time that Norman recognizes it was him doing the killing. Every other time it was Mother totally in control and Norman would have another blackout. And it's the struggle between them for dominance that underlies the last few episodes of Norman's story. Norman does his best to do the right thing, confessing to Sam's murder, but Mother will do anything to maintain their dark paradise. And we see another layer to their battle when Mother knocks out Norman in prison and takes 100% control over him. All of these scenes are really interesting, as it's Norma coming out through Norman, working to her own ends. We see subtle visual references to this via Norma in Norman's reflection or in the viewfinder of a camera when Norman is being interviewed. It's a cool visual way for us to see that it is in fact Mother in charge during these scenes. But there isn't much even Mother can do to save them with the number of bodies that are piling up, and it looks like it's off to jail for a very long time. That is until Romero shows up at the police station on his epic warpath for vengeance and kidnaps Norman right out of the police station. And that's where we leave things off heading into the finale. And I just knew as soon as Romero showed up at the police station, pulling a gun on cops and taking a prisoner after escaping from jail himself, that there wasn't going to be any coming back from this situation. I honestly thought that Romero would be the one to take Norman out in the end, as his journey is driven by retribution for Norman killing Norma. And Romero really did love Norma. I can't help but feel bad for the guy, but it's clear that he's gone way too far, blinded by losing Norma. And we see this as Romero forces Norman out into the woods to dig up Norma's body. Norman apologizes for everything that happened, which angers Romero enough to beat the ever-living crap out of him. And this beating has an interesting effect, as it seems to have shaken Norman back into dominance. This is similar to how Mother knocked Norman unconscious and took over herself. Romero emotionally holds Norma's body, clearly distraught seeing her again, but his emotions leave his guard down and Norman gets the jump on him, knocking Romero on the skull with a rock. Again, I was legitimately surprised this is how things ended for Romero, especially after him suffering all season long. But this is the end of the line, as everything has gone completely haywire, and Norman's only focus at this point is survival. And so he has no choice but to kill Romero, shooting him with his own gun, who bleeds out wheezing about how Norman killed his own mother. Norma appears to Norman for the last time, saying Romero was just trying to hurt him. Norman thinks that he did kill her, and Mother says she has to leave. He doesn't want her to, as he won't have anyone left. But Mother says he knows everything now, and there's nothing left to protect him from. She says goodbye and disappears into the forest. Now Norman is left completely on his own. The Mother personality had been created by him to protect Norman from his inner darkness, and now he is fully aware of what he has done for the first time. But he isn't quite ready to say goodbye to Mother just yet. From there, we have a really well done sequence where Norman takes Norma's body home and he relives flashbacks of them first arriving in town, even repeating what he said that day. It cuts back and forth between the idyllic memory to what reality is now, and it's much more chilling. Norman is bloodied, alone, frazzled, at the end of his wits. This was a very effective way of reminding us of just how much things have fallen apart over the course of the show. But considering the story being told, it was doomed to fall apart even from the very beginning. When Norman first takes Mother's body home and even manages to check a family into the motel, I genuinely thought for a moment it was going to end in a way that would segue into Psycho, with him now completely loony and running the motel. But there is no way to go back to the things they were this time. It's 100% impossible. So this is one of those kinds of shows that can really only end in two different ways. Norman winds up in a mental hospital, or Norman gets killed. But the way things went down was still surprising and very emotional. Dylan goes to meet Norman at home for a nice friendly family dinner. Norman tries to pretend somehow he is fine, but Dylan is understandably concerned about what Norman might do next. And he's here to deal with Norman once and for all, whether that's him in a hospital or dead. He repeatedly says he wants to help Norman, so I did question why he would even bring the gun to the house in the first place. But considering that Norman already tried to kill him once, I'd say it's reasonable. And I really liked the show's finale boiled down to a final confrontation between the two brothers. It was heartbreaking watching how things played out, but it couldn't have been more appropriate. Dylan tries to reason with Norman, maintaining he wants to help him, but Norman is unwilling to consider ending up heavily medicated in a padded cell for the rest of his life. He just wants to be left alone and live his life the way he has been. And in desperation, Norman lunges at Dylan with a knife. Dylan reactively fires a shot, hitting Norman in the gut. Ugh, it's brutal. Dylan didn't want to hurt Norman, but he basically left him with no choice. And in Dylan's arms, Norman dies. Finally at peace, at least. Geez, poor troubled bastard. What a way to go. I did wonder if Norman had pushed Dylan to shoot him on purpose. I think Norman had finally realized everything he had done, and he knew the only way to stop anything else bad from happening was for him to die. Norman even thanks Dylan as he dies, because he also knows in death he can be back together with his mother, which is all he really ever wanted. And the two embrace in a dreamy forest. And we end with a shot of Norma and Norman's grave, buried next to each other, together forever in eternity. It's such a sad ending. I mean, everyone is pretty much dead. At least Emma and Dylan get to have a happy ending. I was worried they were going to get sucked into the drama and their perfect little family would get destroyed. But I'm glad to see someone made it out of this thing okay. Wow, what a great show Bates Motel turned out to be. When I first heard about a Psycho prequel TV series coming out, I was like, well, that sounds terrible. How could you possibly turn that into a TV series? But boy, I was wrong. Bates Motel was an amazing show that evolved into something much more interesting and thrilling than I ever could have imagined. Thanks to the creative writing team and top-notch acting, Bates Motel is so much more than just a prequel to Psycho, and it's a shame it had to end. But it at least delivered a complete story on its own terms, coming to a logical conclusion, which makes it all the more satisfying. Appreciate we got what we did, folks, because it was awesome. What did you guys think of the Bates Motel finale? Did you want Norman to survive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching Found Flicks. See you next time.